Dit is vandag Wêreld-natuurbewaringsdag en ons welkom vir Dr. Pieter Oberem van Afrivet en Richard York van die WRSA of die WRSA, moet mense seker sê van dis Engels nie, hier by ons om te gesels oor hoe wildlewe in Suid-Afrika bewaar word. Good morning, goeiemôre.
Goeiemôre.
Good morning.
Ja, ons praat bietjie oor bewaring, maar kom ons praat oor bewaring spesifiek nou vandag in julle konteks, privaat bewaring. Mense wat hulle eie grond, wat bewaarders is van hulle eie grond. Pieter, miskien wil ek vir jou vra, vertel vir ons, wat is die waarde van die bewaring van privaat mense in Suid-Afrika?
Okay, ekskuus. Ja, die bewaring van wild.
Ja,
Ekskuus,
ekskuus.
So die bewaring van wild daar buite vir ons in die privaat besit is baie anders as die van natuurbewaringsareas. Natuurbewaringsareas se eerste prioriteit is die bewaring van habitat, en die bewaring van biodiversiteit.
Ja.
Ons eerste prioriteit is ekonomiese volhoubaarheid. As ek nie ekonomies volhoubaar is op my plaas nie, dan kan ek nie daai wild aanhou nie. So my tweede doel wat ek bereik is die bewaring van daai wild op die plaas. So die eerste ding moet ekonomies volhoubaar wees vir die wildboer, anders kan hy nie daai wild aanhou nie. En dit pas daarbey vir die wild op sy plaas, vir sy arbeid, vir die werkskepping en die geleenthede wat dit daar skep.
Is dit primêr of is dit maar kan mense die bewaring kom later en kom dit eers die oorlewing?
Eers is definitief die oorlewing, want ons is wildsboere boer op marginale gronde. So dis marginale agricultural gronde wat nie volhoubaar is vir ander lewensboerderye soos mielies, beeste, daai tipe goed.
Okay. Peter, game ranching in South Africa at this stage. It's a very sensitive question for a lot of people who think that the concept of conservation isn't always applied correctly. Tell us what game ranching in South Africa is doing in the conservation angle.
Well, the impact actually, as far as conservation is concerned, of private conservation, in other words, game ranching, is massive. It's double that of what the state has put together in its whole history. So where the state has 6 million where the state has 6% of the land of South Africa under conservation, private ranchers have contributed 12%.
That's double the amount.
So it's double, which puts us over and above the 12% that internationally is recognized as good. Another point for me that's really interesting is that, and I'm sure you've all heard of David Attenborough, the doyen of conservation, knighted for what he's done. He's now introduced a buzzword called rewilding, taking land, old farms, and rewilding them. What's interesting for me, that's now become the fashion and the buzzword in Europe and elsewhere. But we've been doing it for more than 3 decades. It's exactly what we've been doing. There are, most people though focus on iconic species, the big and fluffy, elephant, rhino, lion, and so on. But the real conservation should be and is a broader biodiversity, the whole web that's there. So people actually concentrate on rhino, and there's nothing wrong with that. I do the same. But Africa's biggest fly, Chirostigma, it's actually quite a beautiful fly. It's 6 centimeters in length. It's black, red legs, red antennae, red eyes. It's beautiful. It's an obligate parasite of rhino. Its immature stages, the larvae, the pupae, the larvae are big maggots this size that are found in the gut of a rhino and only there. So when rhino are gone, then the fly is gone. The biggest fly in Africa is also gone. Everything is linked. Dung beetles, for example, yes, they do a wonderful job. We've had to export dung beetles to Australia to help them clean up the muck that the imported cattle have caused there. And there's different dung beetle types for all sorts of different dung. But nobody really notices that there's a little, they call it a forehead mite, a little mite that sits here. And they're hitching a ride because these little mites can't move from dung heap to dung heap. So they hitch a ride on the dung beetle, which flies. And in return, they clean the muck off the joints and in that way help the dung beetle. That sort of thing is not known and not understood by most people. And that's the real contribution that game ranchers do.
You're talking about the biodiversity that game ranchers offer at this stage, or in the shall I say, in the running of a business like a game ranch, there is biodiversity that's happening in the conservation effort. How are we measuring up in South Africa compared to other countries? Because we have a far bigger biodiverse system here than, for instance, in the States.
So in terms of our measurability to the rest of the world, we are definitely world leaders. And it's predominantly got to do with South Africa being different compared to the rest of the world, that we allowed ownership of wildlife because of the 1991 Game Theft Act. So we're quite a new industry. We've only been going for 30-odd years that we've been recognized as an industry. But the difference that we're making is astronomical. If we take our own private reserve or farm that we've got in the Limpopo, when we started, there were no dung beetles, there were no oxpeckers, there were no bat-eared foxes, there were no secretary birds. Because we changed the land use from cropping and livestock to wildlife, all those things came back because we stopped the indiscriminate use of chemicals on the land, etc. So the benefit that game ranching has is astronomical to our biodiversity and support of the country itself.
When we look at game ranching in general, what makes it, I'm going to ask the question, what makes it different from farming free-range chicken? Because they also walk around, they also give you a profit. What's the difference?
There isn't much difference except just on the scale. So it's all about management. Because we talk about the Game Theft Act, in South Africa is one of the most developed countries in Africa. So everyone thinks wild is outside their urban dwelling in the cities. They think everything out there is wild, but they don't understand the factory farming that needs to take place to feed people in urban environments. And if we talk about the fragmentation with roads, power lines, cities, there's no natural migrations within South Africa anymore. Everything is fenced or fragmented in some or other habitat. So you can't allow those animals to exceed their habitat in population growth. You need to manage them. And it's through the game ranching and through uses such as game meat production, hunting, live relocations, that we manage our wildlife on our property. It's our duty to manage the habitat they live in. If we do not manage the habitat that the animals reside on, we'll go bankrupt. So then we're not sustainable in that.
What are some of the biggest myths or controversies around game ranching?
One of the biggest myths is that it's an easy industry to get involved in. It takes time. Your steps and your processes that need to fall in place, it takes many years. And another big myth is that we are harming nature. It's the absolute contrast. Because of the Game Theft Act that gave ownership to wildlife, we've now grown the South African wildlife population that there's more wildlife in the country at the moment than there was 100 years ago.
It's a statement or a statistic that's rather, it's obvious, it's glaring. The economy of ranching, game ranching, has increased or benefited conservation to an extent in South Africa, a very large extent. Tell us, there's also similar issues that the national parks are sitting with, for instance, like the elephant herds are too big. There is a management problem in an area once you fence it off. Isn't that the case?
That's the fundamental issue. As soon as there's a fence, management has to start. The smaller the property, the more intense the management needs to be, of course. But even if you are 2 million hectares, such as the Kruger Park, you need to manage them. And everybody has seen the destruction of the trees, for example, the big trees. There's statistics to show that there were, I don't remember them exactly, let's just say 13 big trees per so many hectares in the past. There's now one. So there is a destruction of the habitat if you do not control numbers when there's a fence. Other issues, for example, are the diseases. So we know that the buffalo in Kruger have TB, We know, obviously, they've got foot and mouth disease. That's normal almost. They've got various blood parasites like filarias and brucellosis, a disease from cattle that's come. So the TB and brucellosis are actually diseases introduced into this country and then with cattle and
they
from
need to
the
be
cattle
managed,
into the buffalo. Nothing can be done.
Yeah.
No, that's not the way to put it. Things can be done, but it's not being done as it should. And as a result, I foresee that one day we're going to have to reintroduce animals, buffalo, rhino, into the parks that have been bred privately.
That's, unfortunately, we run out of time, but that is a great position to be in if you can repopulate the parks with private bred animals.
And it has been done. Rhino were extinct in Rwanda, and South African game ranchers donated
Reintroduced.
black rhino into Rwanda. Yes.
Wow.
Maar jy sien, daar's 'n bietjie bewaring deur mense wat wildboere is. Sien, dit kan gedoen word. Dis vandag Wêreld-natuurbewaringsdag. So baie dankie aan Dr Pieter Oberem en aan Richard York wat by ons kom kuier het om ons te gesels daaroor. Kyk 'n bietjie wat jy kan doen by jou huis hierdie week. Hoekom nie? Wat kan jy doen vir bewaring? Kan jy 'n bietjie ietsie aanplant of nee? Kan jy 'n bietjie bydra vir 'n bewaringsprojek? Dankie dat jy by ons kom kuier het.